Welcome to the debate. Imagine trying to stop a heavily armed drug cartel and doing it not with SWAT teams or state police or military checkpoints, but with village elders and an imam.
Which, probably sounds pretty counterintuitive to most modern security experts.
It does, but in Thailand's deep south, after 22 years of an ethno-nationalist conflict and, well, over 6,000 lives lost, the traditional top-down security approach has just completely failed.
Yeah, it really has. The state poured these eye-watering budgets into the region. They essentially tried to build a massive house by suspending a super heavy roof in mid-air.
Right.
And just, hoping a foundation magically materializes underneath. And it collapsed hard.
Exactly. And the everyday reality on the ground right now, while these people are living through severe violence, isn't just about the specter of physical attacks. The most urgent, heavy issues destroying these communities right now are severe economic and livelihood devastation and a totally rampant drug abuse problem.
Yeah, the entire regional economy has been essentially paralyzed for 2 decades.
Right, which means they need urgent, localized solutions just to survive on a daily basis. So today we are debating a radical re-engineering of this peace architecture, specifically the KAMPUNG Taqwa, or faith community model.
Right, the grassroots blueprint.
Exactly. It's a blueprint attempting to help these communities finally stand on their own feet. And my position today is that this model's reliance on local social capital and moral infrastructure is the definitive game changer. I argue it allows communities to organically solve their own economic and drug crises, and it is the absolute best space to create a genuine safety zone that aligns with ongoing peace talks.
Well, I hear that, and I fully acknowledge the spiritual and, frankly, psychological necessity of this local foundation to heal their trauma. But, you can't just pray away a collapsed supply chain.
Well,
My position is that the Kampung Taqwa model, as beautiful as it is, cannot stand alone against entrenched ethno-nationalist conflict and total economic collapse. It is fundamentally a hybrid innovation. Its actual viability depends heavily on external civil society networks, regional economic integration, and macro-level state parallel structures.
Okay, but let's look at why the state failed first, just to understand why Kampung Taqwa actually works. For 2 decades, the central government suffered from this massive last-mile delivery failure.
Right, the disconnect at the village level.
Exactly. They design a policy, they allocate a huge budget, they send it down, and when it reaches that final kilometer, the village, it hits a massive wall of mutual mistrust. You simply cannot force a community to thrive at the barrel of a gun.
No, obviously not.
So Kampung Taqwa shifts citizens from being passive aid recipients to active peace engineers. And it does this by integrating 4 local pillars into a Shura Council. You have the village head for governance, the imam for a moral compass, local government reps for administration, and the natural leaders or elders for traditional wisdom.
Okay, stop right there for a second. Because I think for a lot of our listeners, hearing that a local religious council is suddenly handling security and administration might set off some immediate alarm bells.
How so?
Well, when we hear religious council enforcing laws, we immediately think of vigilante justice, right? Or authoritarianism. How is this safety zone practically different from just localized extremism?
It's a really critical question. And the difference really comes down to a concept called natural acceptance.
Okay.
Because those 4 pillars sit in the exact same room, like the imam is literally next to the secular government representative. The model organically aligns with both religious principles and secular state law. It isn't vigilantism, it's co-management.
Interesting.
Let's look at the drug problem, which, as we established, is arguably the most urgent crisis destroying the youth there right now. When the Thai state tried to stop the drug trade, they sent in the police. But the locals fundamentally mistrust the state police.
Right.
But under the Shura Council, they use community-led surveillance based entirely on a moral infrastructure.
Right. But I have to push back here. How does a moral infrastructure actually stop a drug dealer who has an entrenched supply line?
Through social death. That is the actual mechanism.
Social death?
Yeah, if a local dealer is arrested by state police, he might just, pay a bribe, get out, and go right back to work. But if he is caught by the village Shura Council,
The accountability is based on a fear of God and deep, deep community ties.
Ah, I see.
The source material references Islamic principles here, specifically Surah Al-Imran, verse 104. This mandates the community to gather to enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. In practice, that means if you sell drugs, you bring immense shame to your family. You are ostracized at the local mosque.
Your social capital is totally zeroed out.
Exactly. Your community functionally excommunicates you until you reform, and that social weight is 1,000 times more effective at curbing drug abuse and local budget leaks, for that matter, than some distant secular judge.
Okay, I will concede that point. Social ostracization works incredibly well for localized behavioral issues. A local elder definitely holds far more sway over a young person's choices than a random soldier at a checkpoint.
Glad we agree on that.
But let's pivot to the other massive pillar of this crisis, the economy. The paktong, the daily livelihood. I just don't buy that a localized moral framework is sufficient to tackle a regional economy that is basically paralyzed.
Why wouldn't it be?
Because a local Shura council cannot single-handedly fix the systemic devastation in Patani, Yala, or Narathiwat.
But they are doing it. They are mapping out their own assets and building cooperative funds right now, entirely locally.
Sure, but mapping assets doesn't magically create market demand. Let's say you have a farmer or a small artisan in one of these 133 KAMPUNG Taqwa villages.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how morally pure their local governance is or how strictly they police drugs. If they have absolutely no one to trade with, they stay poor. The survival of these communities absolutely requires massive knowledge transfer and economic networking from the broader Nusantara region.
And by Nusantara, you mean the broader Malay and Indonesian cultural sphere.
Exactly. We are talking about external NGOs and civil society groups from Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei.
Right.
These are the actors actually training these villages in modern halal business standards. They are the ones connecting them to international supply chains and actually elevating their quality of life. Without that external network, the Kampung Taqwa is just a very peaceful but very impoverished community. The external network makes them viable.
I mean, I see your point, but are they actually ready for that kind of external export market on day one?
What do you mean?
If you connect a fragile, recovering village economy to a massive international supply chain too early, they don't get rich, they get exploited.
Well,
If we credit external NGOs and regional business networks as the primary drivers of this economic revival, we risk recreating the exact same dependency that the state funding caused in the first place.
You think NGO funding is the same as military budgets?
It creates the same dynamic. Think of external funding like a sugar rush. It gives the village a temporary spike in activity, right? But the moment that grant money dries up, or the external organizers pack up and leave, the local economy just crashes again.
So what is the alternative then? Just stay completely isolated?
No, not isolated. The alternative is building slow-burning carbs, building the internal muscle first. The economic resilience of Kampung Taqwa works precisely because the community identifies its own resources first. They map out what the source material calls the 5 to 7 capitals.
Which honestly sounds like a lot of academic jargon. What does that actually mean for a family on the ground?
It means they sit down and literally take inventory of their own survival tools before asking for help. Human capital, like who actually knows how to farm sustainably here? Social capital, who do we trust to run the treasury without stealing from it?
Okay, fair.
Cultural capital, what traditional crafts or halal practices do we already have? Physical capital, what land is actually available? They figure out how to build a localized social enterprise based entirely on their specific way of life, independent of external handouts.
Right.
The external networks might eventually buy the goods, sure. But the engine of production, the core trust required to run a cooperative without corruption, stems entirely from that local, faith-based architecture. If they aren't standing on their own 2 feet first, no amount of Malaysian trade networks is going to save them.
Okay, but standing on their own feet requires a literal floor to stand on. And that floor, legally speaking, is provided by international and state frameworks.
I'm not sure I agree.
Well, you keep brushing past the role of the macro institutions, but the source material itself explicitly aligns the Kampung Taqwa model with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 16. That's peace, justice, and strong institutions.
Right, I know. But I argue the state and the UN should be transitioning to merely supporting the Kampung Taqwa strategy, not imposing their own over it.
But SDG 16 isn't just like a nice plaque on a wall in Geneva. On the ground, it means having a recognized, equitable legal framework.
Sure, let's go back to your local cooperative example. When a local farmer signs a contract with a Malaysian distributor, he needs actual legal recourse if he gets cheated. A local Shura council cannot enforce an international trade dispute.
Well, obviously not.
Right. This is what the text calls parallel strategic integration. The Kampung Taqwa provides the roots. It's the ground-level verification of peace. But it fundamentally requires the umbrella of top-down national peace talks to provide legal direction.
An umbrella that has failed for 22 years. But it's still necessary. Furthermore, you need international organizations involved. Groups like the EU, ActionAid Thailand, Minority Rights Group International. They are required to ensure human rights standards are maintained, especially for vulnerable groups that a traditional, let's face it, patriarchal council might overlook. The roots will drown if they aren't protected by the umbrella.
See, you are still viewing the state and these international bodies as the primary directors of peace, just waiting for the locals to catch up.
Not the directors, but the facilitators.
But look at the reality. Right now, there are ongoing peace talks at the national table between the Thai state and dissenting groups. But those talks are entirely abstract to a family struggling to put food on the table today.
I agree the timeline is an issue.
The Kampung Taqwa model proposes that the state must fundamentally transition its role entirely. They shouldn't be trying to build a better umbrella. They should just be watering the roots.
Watering the roots how, practically? The military is still deeply entrenched there.
By reallocating the budget, the source material argues that Kampung Taqwa should be recognized globally as a security innovation hub.
Okay.
This is a blueprint where the Thai state can take its bloated military budget, money currently wasted on checkpoints that just breed resentment, and invest it directly into what the locals call peace you can eat.
Peace you can eat, meaning livelihood development?
Exactly. Real livelihood development. The Kampung Taqwa is the best, most concrete space to actually implement a safety zone, regardless of what abstract policies come out of those national peace agreements. It proves the community can manage its own security. The state and the SDG agencies just need to unite under a single strategy to systematically support this grassroots level, rather than trying to lead it.
Okay, let's follow that logic for a minute. Let's look at what happens when we actually try to scale that specific grassroots strategy.
Sure.
You are advocating for a model that relies intensely on Islamic faith. It uses specific Quranic verses and relies on the deep reverence for a local imam.
Yes.
That is a highly specific cultural architecture. I have to really question the scalability of using Islamic faith as the core social capital for a supposedly universal blueprint.
But it's scaled. It went from 37 pilot villages to a massive network of 133 villages completely organically.
Within the Deep South.
Well, yes.
Within a region that is overwhelmingly Muslim and culturally cohesive. How does the Security Innovation Hub translate to a conflict zone in a non-Islamic region?
It's the framework that translates, not the specific religion.
But if the entire engine of Kampung Taqwa's success, like you said earlier regarding the drug problem, is based on the fear of God and the threat of social ostracization from the mosque, then it is strictly a localized phenomenon. It is brilliant for Padani or Yala, but you cannot copy-paste this into a secular or globally diverse conflict zone.
I think you were confusing the specific religious text with the underlying mechanical framework.
How so?
Yes.
Kampung
Taqwa utilizes Islamic principles because that happens to be the cultural reality of the Deep South. But the mechanism itself, empowering local community leaders to create a safe space based on shared organic community values, rather than impose state law, that is absolutely universal.
I disagree. I think when you replace the imam with a different moral authority, you fundamentally change the power dynamics of the village.
Not necessarily.
If you try to transplant this into a secular community, what replaces the fear of God to prevent corruption in your local cooperative. You are back to relying on secular law, which brings us right back to the state, the police, and the very top-down enforcement you are trying to avoid.
I don't think that's true. If you take this model to a predominantly Buddhist or Christian or even a completely secular region, the specific texts change, yes. But the four pillars concept remains.
It's whatever moral or ethical authority exists there, administrative access, and traditional wisdom. That formula, building trust at the grassroots level by utilizing whatever the local culture holds sacred, is universal.
It's a nice thought, but
Relying on state legal frameworks as the primary universal language is exactly what failed for 22 years in the South. The secular law was present, the massive state budgets were present, and the result was 6,000 lost lives. The innovation of Kampung Taqwa proves that when the state steps back and lets the community's own moral infrastructure take the lead, the results are exponentially better.
okay, it proves it works for initial stabilization. I will definitely agree with you there. Top-down enforcement absolutely failed to stop the drug trade, and it failed to build trust.
Right.
But to elevate the quality of life, to establish viable trade, and to ensure lasting legal protection, stabilization isn't enough. You need integration. To pretend that the village is entirely self-sufficient ignores the massive, invisible web of civil society support that makes their local enterprise viable in the first place.
I'm not ignoring it.
The NGOs from Indonesia and Malaysia aren't just giving handouts. They are providing the vital connective tissue that allows local goods to actually reach regional markets. They are teaching sustainable development practices that align with global standards.
I am definitely not ignoring that web. I am just arguing about where the center of gravity must lie.
Okay.
If the center of gravity is external, like if we rely on Malaysian markets or Thai military treaties as the actual foundation, the community remains fragile. But if the center of gravity is the Kampung Taqwa, the community is robust enough to engage with the outside world on its own terms.
Fair point.
They become partners in trade, right? Not dependents on aid. This is exactly why this model is the most effective way to implement safety zone policies. It demonstrates that severe economic distress and drug proliferation can only be sustainably solved when the community utilizes its own moral infrastructure to engineer peace first.
And I maintain that sustainable peace is not a solo endeavor. The Kampung Taqwa model is a brilliant piece of the puzzle, and the psychological healing it provides is unparalleled. But it is fundamentally a hybrid achievement. You need the indispensable support of regional civil societies for economic viability. You need international rights organizations to ensure equitable standards. And ultimately, you need top-down state peace negotiations to provide a lasting legal framework. You need both the roots and the umbrella.
Well, if there is a clear point of convergence between us today, it is our shared recognition that the 22-year top-down security-first approach has unequivocally failed.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot enforce peace from the outside in, and you certainly cannot solve an economic and drug crisis with a military checkpoint.
On that, we are in total agreement. Building trust at the grassroots level is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for any future resolution in the Deep South. The state really must stop treating these citizens as security threats and start treating them as vital partners in their own recovery.
It really reflects the profound value of looking at conflict resolution not just from, international negotiating tables, but from the village square up.
Definitely.
There is just so much more to explore regarding how localized faith initiatives intersect with global development goals like the SDGs, and how true economic resilience is built community by community.
Indeed. It forces us to entirely reconsider the mechanics of peace building in complex ethno-nationalist conflicts. The solution is rarely as simple as just signing a document.
Out to build a lasting house of peace, do you focus all your energy and resources on suspending a massive, heavy roof in midair? Or do you finally look down at the soil, trust the local roots, and start building the foundation?